Good morning, Senior Pride here. Today I want to talk about a complex topic, and it is the issue of cultural exclusion in seniors' housing. It is a multifaceted issue that poses significant challenges in seniors' housing. As populations increasingly become diverse, as seniors' facilities seem to often fail to address the cultural needs, preferences, and identities of residents from different ethnic, racial, linguistic, and religious backgrounds, this becomes an increasingly complex issue. The fact is, this inclusion not only impacts the mental and physical well-being of older adults, but also exacerbates feelings of loneliness and isolation. Now, I can personally attest to this as someone who doesn't believe in a higher power, but was raised Jewish and continues to engage in some of my culture's beliefs and activities. It is very difficult to live in an environment that is so narrowly focused on, quite frankly, white and Christian. So we need to kind of understand where this cultural exclusion comes from. First of all, cultural exclusion refers to the marginalization or omission of cultural practices, languages, values, and traditions from institutional settings or social structures. So in the context of seniors' housing, it includes a lack of representation and accommodation of diverse cultural identities within those living environments. It involves a lack of activities, meals, religious practices, and caregiving approaches that support and understand and enhance those different diverse backgrounds. How is this relevant? Well, given that we are living in a rapidly globalized world where immigration is becoming more important and there are shifting generational patterns, it becomes crucial. By 2050, over 22% of the global population is expected to be over 60 years old. And there is going to be and continues to be a significant diversity in cultural background. Yeah, most senior housing, certainly in Western cultures, is designed around whatever the dominant cultural norm is, and in Western cultures that tends to be Christianity, and it neglects the needs of diverse cultures. So let me give you a few examples of cultural exclusion. A lack of multilingual staff that cannot speak the prominent language for a person whose language may not be English. Inadequate dietary options, so options that do not align with cultural or religious dietary restrictions. Absences of spaces for spiritual practices or celebrations of cultural holidays. Racial or ethnic stereotypes that influence caregiving decisions. Now, I'm going to bring something forward to you. I've had to buy this kind of plastic menorah with digital lights because I'm not allowed to have candles. When people take the time to come into my room and see that, they assume it's a Christian something, like a toy. They do not realize it has deep cultural significance for me. Every year, I light my candles in my room alone with no one else to share. And that happens with every Jewish holiday. I have no access to appropriate meals or other parts of my culture. It is very difficult to be the only person from this cultural identity in this building, but there are many of us in this building who come from diverse cultures and experiences, and we are ignored. And to that end, I talk about the causes of cultural exclusion, structural racism, and historical inequities. Many seniors' housing models are rooted in systemic inequities where marginalized groups have historically had less access to resources like healthcare, housing, and social services. These inequities are perpetuated in facility design and management. Homogenized facility design. Seniors housing is designed in this one-size-fits-all approach, catering predominantly to whatever the cultural majority is, and in Canada that is white and Christian. English or maybe French speaking, depend where you live in Canada. This approach ignores nuanced needs of residents from diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds. It completely puts us aside. There is also a lack of cultural competence among staff members. Caregivers and administrators lack training in cultural competence. This leads to misunderstandings, miscommunications, and sometimes unintentional biases in caregiving decisions. Economic barriers. Affordable seniors housing is very scarce for low-income populations, particularly, and this proportionately affects minority populations. This economic exclusion is often intertwined with the cultural exclusion, as private facilities simply lack the incentive to diversify their services, as do public facilities. There is an impact of cultural exclusion. They are significant. For example, psychological and emotional well-being. When you are experiencing cultural exclusion in a senior's environment, it can lead to increased rates of depression, anxiety, loneliness, and isolation. The ability to express one's cultural identity or to partake in familiar traditions contributes to feelings of empowerment. If those opportunities do not exist, alienation is increased. There are health disparities. So miscommunication between caregivers and residents due to language barriers or cultural misunderstandings can result in poor health outcomes, including mixed diagnosis, medication errors, and non-compliance with treatment. There is social isolation. When you feel culturally excluded, you are less likely to participate in group activities or form social connections within your housing community. This can further deteriorate mental and physical health. There is an intergenerational disconnect that occurs. Cultural exclusion often prevents seniors from sharing their traditions and values with younger generations, which can erode familial bonds and a sense of legacy. So let's look at some strategies for addressing cultural exclusion in seniors' homes. We can promote cultural competence for caregivers. That would include training programs. So staff need to undergo cultural competence training to understand diverse traditions, languages, and preferences. We can hire diverse staff. Facilities should aim to hire caregivers from various cultural backgrounds to reflect the diversity of their residents. Another issue is incorporating inclusive facility design, flexible spaces, creating multi-purpose spaces that can accommodate cultural celebrations, religious practices, and community events is key. Diverse menus, offering meals that cater to different dietary needs, and just as a few examples, halal, kosher, vegetarian, culturally specific cuisines. We can encourage resident input. So cultural advisory boards, we can establish resident-led committees to provide feedback on cultural programming and facility policies. Surveys and feedback mechanisms that are honest and look at cultural diversity. We can regularly assess resident satisfaction and look at cultural needs through anonymous surveys, as I said, that look at these issues. We can build partnerships with community organizations. Collaborating with cultural organizations, religious groups, local leaders can enhance cultural programming and resource accessibility in seniors housing. Leverage technology. Language translation tools, providing multilingual support through technology for both residents and staff. Virtual cultural programming, using digital platforms to connect residents with cultural events, family members, or religious services. Now, there have been some successes in places. There's been culturally specific housing models, but they're expensive, and many people, ironically, from the very cultures who need them, can't afford them. But there have been homes that cater to, for example, Chinese, South Asian, or Jewish communities. And they prioritize cultural familiarity and inclusivity through design, staff training, and programming. Inclusive policy implementation is very important. Facilities that have adopted inclusive policies, such as celebrating diverse holidays or providing language classes, tend to report higher resident satisfaction and engagement. So, what are the policy implications? Well, first of all, regulatory standards are very important. Governments play a critical role. If they mandate cultural competence as part of licensing requirements for seniors housing facilities, this will increase cultural competence. It's necessary to fund for inclusion activities. So public funding should be allocated to support the development of inclusive programs and the retrofitting of existing facilities to better accommodate diverse residents. What about national guidelines for diversity and aging? Our national governments need to develop comprehensive guidelines that address cultural inclusion in seniors housing at that national level, so they can set a benchmark so that facilities will follow. There are many things that need to be done. For example, research and data collection, much more is needed. Really isn't much out there. And we need to look at the value and effectiveness of inclusion strategies. We need to empower advocacy groups. So advocacy organizations focused on aging and cultural diversity can amplify the voices of marginalized seniors and push for systemic change. We need to integrate intergenerational models. By bringing younger generations into seniors housing through volunteer programs or shared spaces, we can help bridge cultural and generational gaps. Cultural exclusion is a huge issue in seniors housing, and it reflects broader societal inequities. We need to address this in a holistic approach involving facility design, caregiver training, resident empowerment, and policy reform. As the global population continues to age and diversify, creating inclusive environments in seniors housing is not just a moral imperative, but a societal necessity. If we embrace cultural diversity, we can foster communities where all seniors feel valued, respected, and feel like they're at home. So if you enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe and explore. And I ask you to share with people who might enjoy this video. With that being said, remember, to be senior is to be proud. Hugs.